Hi guys. In a, in my last video, I talked about ways that you could teach critical literacy or understand critical literacy. And one of the pedagogical ways of learning critical literacy is through digital storytelling. And we can also teach critical literacy using digital storytelling. And why I'm creating this video is because I want us to use our class time to discuss how you can create your own stories, how you can use the technology tool that I will introduce to you to create your digital stories. And I want you to watch this video before you come to class so that you'll have an understanding of what digital storytelling is. So in this video, I'm going to explain very briefly what stories are, why stories are very powerful, and then we talk about some forms and types of stories, and then we dovetail into digital storytelling. I would explain what digital stories are, and then elements of digital stories and how we can create our storyboard and some technology tools that we can use to create our stories. So, what is a story? A story or a narrative is a connected series of events told through words. So, these words could be written or spoken. It could also be imagery. So this imagery could be still, it could be moving. We also use body language, performance, music, or any form of communication. And we tell stories about everything, even our lives. We tell stories with our lives. We tell stories with everything that we do. We hear stories all the time. Stories captivate us. So stories are of great value to human culture and are some of the oldest, most important parts of our lives. Like I said, we have all told stories our whole lives, and Mark Travis defined stories as a depiction of a journey. In a story, we follow a character or a series of characters on a journey as they pursue something up against certain obstacles. So, in a story, there's always a problem, there's always a plot, there's always something that you need to solve. But we get into that when we talk about the elements of stories. So, why are stories very powerful, right? We want to talk about the essence of story. Why are they very powerful? So the first reason why I think stories are very powerful is because we use them to make a point. And properly selected stories, the ones that we tell, are can make a point in ways that other forms of communications cannot. And stories allow the listener to learn through action of others and discover lessons from that action. So that's a very important way of passing our position or our information across. We use stories to make a valuable point. And then stories make things meaningful. Yeah, so we tell story to have greater context and understanding of a situation. So stories can personalize a message and makes us feel part of the situation. Some people even insert themselves into a story to make them understand a situation very well. So it makes things very meaningful to us. We can understand the context in ways that we won't be able to if it wasn't told using a story. And then stories create and reveal emotions. This is something that happens all the time. We watch a movie a sad movie, it could make us cry. We watch a very interesting, funny movie, we laugh about it. So stories um, gives us that energy, whether it's the sad energy or the happy energy. So it creates emotions, and we use this a lot when we try to teach because we want our students to have some emotional attachment to the content that we are teaching them. So we try to use storytelling to reveal or to create that kind of emotions. And then stories build connections. This is probably the most important aspect of storytelling because we use stories to teach, persuade, and understand one another. We remember and make connections more easily when information or experience is pinned to a story. And you if we look at most of the relationships that we have, we use stories to disclose who we are when we want to build these relationships. So it's quite likely that people that we feel the greatest bond to are people that we share our stories with. It's a bond between the teller of the story and also the receiver of the story. So stories helps us to it triggers our imagination and tap into our creativity to discover and to explore and create connections between the teller of the story and also the person that is receiving the story. So it helps us to pass traditions down from generation to generation. So stories help us a lot, and it's a very good tool to use inside of the classroom and also outside of the classroom. So briefly, let's talk about the types of stories. The first one is oral storytelling. In oral storytelling, this is a form of spoken words. We use spoken words to tell stories in singing, in chanting, in poetry. Like I said, we use stories we to pass family traditions from generation to generation. I'm sure that you would have listened to stories probably from your grandparents telling you that, oh, I'm telling you this story because my grandma told me this story, or my mom or my dad told me this story. So this is one of the types of stories that we have. And then we have visual storytelling. These are you know the stories that are told through visual elements such as painting, carvings, and others. And then we have written storytelling. These are stories that we put down with pen, as publications evolve over the years. We start to put down stories, and we use the computer to type out stories. We write it by hand sometimes. So written storytelling has to do with the way we write out the story, whether through text, using the computer, or even by hand. So digital storytelling, this is what we want to focus on today because it is contemporary, is what we have, what many people do because of the evolution of technology. And digital storytelling has to do with using technology tool. This technology tool could be in form of audio, video, and pictures, or the combination of those three to create a story. So we have this multimodal element in many digital stories. So fiction stories are based on made up or imaginary events. These are events that did not happen, just the figment of imagination. Someone wrote a story based on some imaginary things. And We have fairy tales, mythology, ghost stories, historical fiction, science fiction, love stories, and then bedtime stories. And then we have non-fiction stories. Non-fiction stories are stories that actually happened. And some of these stories could be historical events, could be cultural history, biographies, and autobiographies, and war stories. So, what's the definition itself of digital story? So, like I explained the other time, we use technology. We try to use most of the time computer technology to which include still pictures, audio, videos to tell a personal story in a way that is compelling and engaging. So that's what we create. How that's what the elements of digital stories are. We have audio, we have videos, we have pictures, and the combination of these three to create a story, a very compelling and engaging story. So let's briefly talk about the elements of digital story. So in a digital story, we have the plot, and the plot is the thread of events that occur in a story. So it's the sequential way we write the story. We move from plot A to plot B to plot C to plot D. So if you've ever experienced a drama, or you watch a drama in a theater, you see that they have different plots. You have plot A when some set of characters come out and they perform, and then some characters come out in plot B, or plot 2 come out and they perform. So this like the sequence of events that happen in a story. And I'm using if we I don't know if you have watched Romeo and Juliet, but if you have, it's a story about conflict, is a story about hatred, is a story about transformative power, darkness, selfishness that is represented by two families that were in conflict. So the love between two individuals that are from families that are actually in conflict. So this is the plot of the story, and that was what transpired throughout the story. So if we also, the second element is the setting. The setting is the location of the event in time and place. For Romeo and Juliet, the setting or the location of event is set in, I think, 16th or 17th century England. To think about this element in designing your digital story. And first, like I said, is the plot. Number 2 is the setting, and number 3, you need to decide on the characters. So the characters are people that drive the plot. They are impacted by the plot, and sometimes they could be bystanders to the plot. So in Romeo and Juliet, the characters are Romeo, Juliet, the nurse, Capulet, Lady Capulet, and other characters in the story. So the story is centered around these characters. So you need to decide on who your characters are in your story, and then we have the conflict. Sometimes you might not have a conflict in your story, but you have an event or an idea that you need to address. So, but in some of the stories, you could have a problem that needs to be resolved. So, in a plot, you have a tension. So, that tension generates conflict. and then you want to solve the conflict. So in Romeo and Juliet, we have family feud requires two lovers to remain enemies. That's what is required of them. The families are in conflict with each other, and these two fellows love each other, so they the families needed them to remain enemies, but they couldn't hate each other, right? And that created a big problem between the families. So the theme is the last element in a story, in a digital story. The theme is arguably the most important aspect of a story. So it's a storytelling, a digital story. It talks about the moral of the story and what the writer wants you to understand from the story. So in Romeo and Juliet, the writer wanted people to understand the imperfectness of the world. So this is just putting the component of digital storytelling into a chart. So we have the plot and the characters. So you have the events and relationships. These events could also represent the problems that you want to solve. And some of the characters would have some relationships. You would have a protagonist and you sometimes have a villain. Sometimes you really don't need to have a protagonist and a villain. You just need to understand the idea of your story and how elements in your stories align. And then we have central plot and subplot, but this is talking about a story that is big. And some of the stories that we create or we write about, these are short stories, especially in education. We write short stories and they really don't have subplot because they're not very lengthy. So we have these plots, which, as I explained earlier, is like the sequence of events, the narrative, how things happen from A to B to C and to D. So that's how the component works. And then this one is more or less integrating into how we can use digital stories in the classroom. So we look at um, us having an idea, and when we have an idea is talking about the question that we want to ask, and that is related to the plot. Having the question is related to talking about the plot. So what's the idea that we want to talk about in our story? So some of the questions that could guide us in thinking about the question is what is written here. Is something happening in your community that needs awareness, or is there an issue or an event that needs its story told? So those are the things that could help us to understand the idea behind our story or to help us develop an idea. And so the next one is talking about acquire information and analyze data. So here we are actually talking about gathering information, thinking about characters and the settings. So we need to decide on where we are going to get our our information, whether we need to go to the library, whether we need to search online, go to do interviews, take pictures. So we need to gather everything that we need for our story and then start to put them put them in place, know which one that we are going to use at each point in time. So we need to organize things very well. And then moving on to the organization and organize your thoughts and information. So you take all the information that you've acquired, you've analyzed, you know exactly what the idea is, you know the problem, you know the characters, you know the plot, you know um, the settings, and then you start to organize all your, you know, put in different arrangements, different thoughts, different ideas to each of the plots, each of the sequence. So it's at this stage you're organizing your thoughts and your information. You are revising and editing them. You are putting videos together. You're putting audio together. You're putting all these things together to create your stories, and then you think of the technology tool to use. We're going to talk a little bit about this later, and then we do revisions, and then we create our story, we publish our story. So I want you to take a look at this very well. If we the tools that we can use, I'll actually recommend that we use either Camtasia or Microsoft Sway. We could also use PowerPoint, Adobe Illustrator, Adobe Spark, or Adobe Premiere Pro. But Microsoft Sway and Camtasia have a very easy learning curve, so I'd encourage us to use those two or one of them. So we're going to talk more about this in class and how we can create a storyboard. So in creating a storyboard, we need to think of 6-word long story. This is the first exercise that we're going to do in class. I'll explain what you need to do with this, and then think of the plot or the question, then think of information gathering, think of the characters that will be in your story, think of the settings, think of how you can organize your story, and identify the tool that you want to use. And then you revise and design your story and keep editing until you are satisfied. So this is, I said it's not going to be a long video, but I see it's like 20 something minutes. I would encourage you to watch this video and make some, have some questions for me, and then when we come to class you could ask me questions and we discuss, and also have some hands-on activities on the how you can design your own digital story. See you in class.